cheaply. And serendipitously, I just found myself living in a lot of indigenous communities. So while I was pursuing my postgraduate studies, my research in basically the evolution of scientific paradigms over time, but most importantly, evolutionary theory, how evolutionary theories evolved over time, I was beginning to notice a lot of convergence between what I was learning in these indigenous communities along with my scientific research. So it's a really cool area. We'll be talking about a lot of integrative, interdisciplinary stuff between indigenous knowledge systems, something like IKS, traditional ecological knowledge with evolutionary biology in modern Western society or modern Western science today. So and then I moved. So I worked for a nonprofit called Pro Social World for 2 years. I was headed by David Sloan Wilson, this dude, and he worked with Eleanor Ostrom. So does anybody know Eleanor Ostrom here? Okay, don't feel bad because not many people do, but you do. Oh, okay. I thought you pointed there, so I was like, okay, we got one. So she won the Nobel Prize in 2008. She's the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics, actually. She studied indigenous cultures and why she basically solved the tragedy of the commons issue. So she basically looked at why certain sites, certain areas of the world don't overexploit their resources and why people work together in better cooperative systems than other people in the world. And so she realized the utility of working with evolutionary theory on this because it gave them an entire theoretical foundation for everything she was studying. Her thing was called the core design principles, which we'll talk about a bit about today. But so they evolutionized that into something called multi-level selection theory, which hopefully I'll get to today. And so that's what he is the progenitor of. It's kind of the new way that we look at the evolution of life. It's not so much about Darwinian competition, survival of the fittest type mentality. It's more about how we build cooperative structures over longer timescales than just focusing myopically on very short timescales and phenomena, I guess. But so yeah, he's kind of the new Darwin, you can call him, but very humble guy. He would never say that, so I like to call him that. But he's my mentor. He sits on my nonprofit board. And what I was doing for them is trying to teach this framework to politicians, and it went about as well as one can surmise. And so I just decided to do my own nonprofit, kind of integrate more of what I was interested in, which is a lot of eco-politics, eco-spirituality, and indigenous teachings. And so, David sits on my board. For Arrows, Dr. Narvaez, so For Arrows is a leading figure in indigenous studies, and then Dr. Narvaez is a leading developmental psychologist at Notre Dame University. So very cool to have this group on my board and involved in the type of work that I'm doing because it's kind of like new frontiers. There's not a whole lot of people who are doing it. Somebody who does it better than anybody, though, is Robin Wall Kimmerer. So if anybody has read Braiding Sweetgrass, that's a good interlude into this work. So love her. So moved here not too long ago, started the New People Foundation 6 months ago. Brand new foundation here. I just want to talk about this first because if people leave, then you probably won't see it at the end. So we kind of do a whole lot. I guess I'm trying to do a lot of my academic research, a lot of the things that I would be doing at a university, but just doing it here in Northern Michigan. So holding public lectures like this, hosting courses, potentially working with universities and tribal educational departments to build new curriculum. In the first year, 6 months, we have helped Dr. Saul an estimated 11.2 to 15 billion dollars in dirty investments. So if you've seen this stuff about gravel pits in Antrim County, we're a little bit behind that. Data centers in Kalkaska. We hosted the protests in Lansing against data centers, so that's another topic that we probably won't get so much into today, but we'd love to chat with anybody about that because that's a massive issue that has basically set us back decades on our clean energy policy in Michigan here. So I contributed to a bunch of media outlets, produced and distributed a bunch of pamphlets on gravel mines and data centers, the public health effects as well as the ecological effects of them, and just tried to distill the science into these really manageable proportions, which I've had the most success actually with, because I'm trying to learn how to not be so academic and talk about it in better ways. So hopefully that comes through today, and I'm making some progress with that. So just doing a lot of community building projects too. So we'll talk a lot about community-based politics here. So if you ever want to get involved or donate or anything, last year we secured $500 in donations. So we're hoping to do a little bit better, make our nonprofit sustainable to this year. Because if we did all this with no money, then hopefully with a little bit of money we can do some cool things. Oh, and this first project here, which I will talk about at one slide, is a political pamphlet I'm writing with 4 other public figures in Michigan here, called Common Enemy. And so I was trying to redraw identity boundaries in Michigan, not along left or right or urban and rural, to rather see it as a fight versus the majority, the 99% of us who just want to live simple lives, don't really want to control anybody, just want to have emphasis on social relationships in our community rather than the 1% who really focus more on controlling everybody else and wanting to extract profits from us and all that. So, if you want to talk about that or fund this, we are looking for donations to print and publish this. They're cost about $1 to $2, and then we're going to distribute them all over Michigan. So hopefully we'll do that all before 2026 midterms here. So I want to start just talking a little bit about cognitive dissonance and ontological shock. So some things here, I am a very weird thinker, I've been told. Strange thinker to a lot of people because they don't think of putting certain things where I'm going to put them. So I think the first thing to just be aware of is whenever you hear new information and it usually conflicts with your worldview, we build very strong worldviews. Usually you go through some amount of cognitive dissonance and you try your best, your brain, your psychologist try your best to tell you, hey, this isn't true, or try to work it around so that you keep your own belief system intact. Whereas if you have enough cognitive dissonance in a small amount of periods and you leave crumbs for people after a while, you will undergo something called an ontological shock, which is just a massive worldview and perceptual change, which I think we need in our society today. Actually, the best way to have an ontological shock is to take a bunch of psychedelics. This is the psychological research on ontological shock, basically, but that's the safer way to do this in the way that I think about having an ontological shock moment was actually just studying this. So I think you can still do this through just going out, being in nature, understanding this basic science, and so think about that. And also, if there are things that you feel like do conflict with your belief system today, I promise you they don't that much. And I would love to sit back afterwards and talk more about that today. We'll be touching on everything from politics and religion, and I know those are hard concepts for a lot of people, and very ingrained in their identity system. So, would love to chat more with anybody after this. So, okay, so the narrative structure of this big talk is grounded in the Seven Fire Prophecy. Has anybody heard of the Seven Fire Prophecy before? Okay, nice. Yep. So it's an ancient Anishinaabe prophecy. Here, I'll go to this slide. So Anishinaabe are all the First Nations people. That's actually all the main tribes in Michigan are Anishinaabe people, First Nations people. So over 1,000 years ago, and long before the arrival of European settlers on the American continent, the native Anishinaabe people then living in northeastern coast of North America, what is now today New Brunswick, received a prophecy from 7 prophets marking the 7 forthcoming phases or epochs in the life of the people residing on Turtle Island, which is what they called North America. So all 7 prophets gave the Anishinaabe people a prediction of what the future would bring. Each of these prophecies was called a fire, and each fire represented a particular era or epoch in the future. And so archaeological evidence of the Anishinaabe migration puts the prophecies anytime between the 8th and 9th century, when they started New Brunswick and kind of started migrating this way. And so I won't be able to go through the first 3 fires because we don't have a whole lot of time, but essentially the first few fires are talking about the migration from New Brunswick to, I forget what that first fire is, but the second one is Niagara Falls, I believe, or maybe the first one's Niagara Falls, I can't remember. The first, second, and third is Detroit River there. So go back and just search on Wikipedia the Seven Fires Prophecy, because the first 3 are really fascinating from archaeological standpoint, or just to know the history of why they were moving, why people were moving this way. So they're always looking for the sacred Midgey shell, the turtle-shaped island, and they found that at the Detroit River for the 3rd fire here. And all this I found, by the way, Mishelmi's book, if you want a better source of it. So it's Edward Benton Benai was a tribal elder, I believe, chieftain of the Ojibwe in the UP. So he wrote this book several years back because he believed this knowledge should be for everybody and not just for the tribes. So in the 4th fire, the 4th prophet came as a 2-spirited person, they say, that there were 2 prophets. And the first prophet said that
You will know the future of our people by the face of the light-skinned, or by the face the light-skinned race wears. If they come wearing the face of brotherhood, then there will come a time of wonderful change for generations to come. They will bring new knowledge and articles that can be joined with the knowledge of this country. In this way, two nations will join to make a mighty nation. This new nation will be joined by two more, so that four will form the mightiest nation of all. You will know the face of the brotherhood if the light-skinned race comes carrying no weapons, if they come bearing only their knowledge and a handshake. And so, by the way, the four races that they're mentioning in here, actually, they don't call them races in native languages. We'll get to that later on here. But actually, the four are the same as the medicine wheel. So it's the black race, the white race, the yellow race, and the red race, or the red race. So that makes sense a little bit behind the little history of the medicine wheel there. But so the second prophet said, "Beware if the light-skinned race comes wearing the face of death. You must be careful because the face of brotherhood and the face of death look very much alike. If they come carrying a weapon, beware. If they come in suffering, they could fool you. Their hearts may be filled with greed for the riches of this land. If they are indeed your brothers, let them prove it. Do not accept them in total trust. You shall know that the face they wear is one of death. If the rivers run with poison and fish become unfit to eat, you shall know them by these many things." Oh, so yeah, okay. And so, yeah, the first contact between the Anishinaabe people and the European settlers was made in Sault Ste. Marie, actually, in about 1550 to 1600 AD. And these were the French. They referred to them as the Wamiti-Guzhu, which translates to the wooden boat people. And so it quickly became apparent to the Anishinaabe which face the European settlers bore. Historians largely consider this time period from the first contact made in the late 15th century to the end of European colonization in the late 17th century to be the deadliest extermination campaign in human history. A lot of people don't know that, but during this period, the population of Native Americans decreased from 145 million to less than 15 million in a very short time span here. So conservative estimates place the number of deceased Indigenous Americans at around 130 million as the result of deadly massacres, mass rapes, forced starvations, wars, and chattel slavery imposed by European settlers, as well as various epidemics. So it became very apparent very quickly what face the light-skinned race came wearing. And it was not the face of brotherhood. So the fifth fire talked about a time of great struggle. In the time of the fifth fire, there will come a time of great struggle that will grip the lives of all Native people. At the waning of this fire, there will come among the people one who holds a promise of great joy and salvation. If the people accept this promise of a new way and abandon the old teachings, then the struggle of the fifth fire will be with the people for many generations. The promise that comes will prove to be a false promise. All those who accept this promise will cause the near destruction of the people. And so this is a quote here from Charles Cleland, who I found out not too long ago is actually a residing member of the Charlevoix community. He lives in Norwood, pretty close to you here. So funny enough, I was reading this like 5 years ago. His work, I didn't know that he lived here. And I went to go, I live in Antrim Dells, and I went to go to the Antrim Creek Natural Reserve, and he has all of his work there. And I go, how do I know that? Charles Cleland, how do I know that name? And then I went back to my work sometime, and I go, oh, it's the same guy who lives up here and does this. So it's crazy how influential his work has been. But yeah, he's I really wish that we could have got him to come here. So from the perspective of Benton Benai, by the way, he talks about how light-skinned men in long black robes came clutching a black book to their chest and carrying something that initially seemed to honor the four directions of Native American spirituality. These men were impressed with the generosity, honor, and respect shown by the Anishinaabe, but still they wanted the Anishinaabe to change their ways and accept the teachings of a man from far away. They warned that by not following the book, the Anishinaabe would not be able to walk the path of souls to the star web to join their relatives. This frightened many of the Anishinaabe, and as a result, many of them left their traditional ways to follow the black coats and their black clothes. A wedge was now driven between the Anishinaabe who followed the traditional ways of their ancestors and the others who followed the new way, fractioning their communities and breaking the circle of the once great Anishinaabe nation. And so, and this is just a quote from Cleland here, that the soil tactics used to separate Indians from their ancestral land holdings and their subsequent concentration on tiny reservations is perhaps the most morally despicable story in Northern American history. It is also one of the culturally most complex, involving a mix of paternalistic goodwill, racism, arrogance, and ignorance that is difficult to understand. I really wish Charles was here so we could ask him more of what he meant by that, but I have a little bit of an idea, so if we have questions later on, hopefully we can get to that. So again, I doubt that many people have heard of the Sandy Lake tragedy, but this was another bad moment in U.S. history here. So under President Zachary Tyler's direction, 4 U.S. government officials conspired in the fall of 1850 to trap the Anishinaabe in the harsh winter, forcing them to remain at an isolated location in Minnesota without preparation, resources to survive, or aid. So their goal was to entice the Anishinaabe living in the Lake Superior region away from their lands by moving the place of the annual annuity payments to a new temporary location at Sandy Lake on the east bank of the Mississippi River. The officials then acted out the plan by stalling the delivery of annuity goods and money. And so this is a missionary, Reverend John Peetzel, recalled that he was with a frequently separated died in a day. Coffins could not be procured, and often the body of the deceased was wrapped up in a piece of bark and buried slightly underground. All over the cleared land, graves were to be seen in every direction for miles distant from Sandy Lake. So, yeah, that's a little Michigan history there. Okay, so the sixth fire talks about the boarding school era, the era of false promises here. So in the time of the sixth fire, it will be evident that the promise of the fifth fire came in a false way. Those deceived by this promise will take their children away from the teaching of the elders. Grandsons and granddaughters will turn against the elders. In this way, the elders will lose their reason for living. They will lose their purpose in life. At this time, a new sickness will come among the people. The balance of many people will be disturbed. The cup of life will almost become the cup of grief. And so I don't know if anybody has watched Taylor Sheridan's 1923, but how he depicts, have you seen how he depicts the boarding school era is massively, he actually had historians come work with him on that. And that's why it was as gruesome as it was, because it was very hard to watch. But yeah, if you want to accurate depiction, watch that series. And yeah, so Cleon again writes that in 25 years, the boarding schools accomplished what an armed force, starvation, disease, loss of land, and Christianity could not. A major and irreversible disruption of Indian culture. It also effectively prepared Indian young people not for assimilation into middle-class America, but as laborers in American fields and factories. And so the seventh fire is technically the last fire, the last prophet. So what this prophet said is that in the time of the seventh fire, the new people will emerge. This is where my foundation name arises from. They will retrace their steps to find what was left by the trail. Their steps will take them to the elders, who will ask to guide them on their journey, but many of the elders will have fallen asleep. They will awaken to this new time with nothing to offer. Some of the elders will be silent because no one will ask anything of them. The new people will have to be careful on how they approach the elders. The task of the new people will not be easy. If the new people remain strong in their quest, the water drum of the Midwewin Lodge will again sound its voice. There will be a rebirth of the Anishinaabe nation, a rekindling of old flames. The sacred fire will again be lit. In this time that the light-skinned race will be given a choice between two roads. One road will be green and lush and very inviting. The other road will be black and charred, and walking it will cut their feet. If they choose the right road, then the seventh fire will light the eighth and final fire, an eternal fire of peace, love, brotherhood, and sisterhood. If the light-skinned race makes the wrong choice of the roads, then the destruction which they brought with them in coming to this country will come back at them and cause much suffering and death to all of Earth's people. So there are different interpretations, too, of the seven fires prophecy, and different Anishinaabe leaders have other things to add. There's one council that actually kind of centers around this knowledge, or protects this knowledge, basically. So one elder shared that traditional Mide people from other nations have interpreted the two roads that face the light-skinned race as the road to technology and materialism on one side, and the other to spiritualism. They feel that the road to technology represents a continuation of headlong rush to technological development. This is the road that has led to modern society to a damaged and seared earth. Could it be that the road to technology represents a rush to destruction? The road to spirituality represents a slower path that traditional Native people have traveled and are now seeking again. So the earth is not scorched on this trail. The grass is still growing there. And if the natural people of the earth could just wear the face of brotherhood, we might be able to deliver our society from the road to destruction. Could we make the two roads that today represent two clashing worldviews come together to form one mighty nation? Could a nation be formed that is guided by respect for all living things? Are we the new people of the seventh fire? So Anishinaabe leaders do believe that we exist today in the seventh fire age. This is, again, their creation story. This is a very big part of their worldview. And so, yeah, this is again, people talk about these two roads as the one path, the path to technology and continuing on this path of materialism, and another to spiritual return to perhaps an ancient way of being. So others note that these two representing roads represent two clashing worldviews coming together to form one mighty nation. What they call the mightiest spiritual nation to ever exist, which would be coming in the eighth fire. So I will not be getting to that today because I don't think I'll be able to end my presentation, but hopefully by the next time we'll get to the eighth fire. So yeah, we'll start to probably with the more negative side of this. I apologize. This is probably the majority of what we talk about today. The black and charcoal, the materialistic side that I believe we've been walking upon for the last few thousand years. So if you haven't seen the news, the doomsday plot has been set to 85 seconds to midnight. Scientists have largely changed it due to Russia, China, and the U.S. and other countries becoming increasingly aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic. And so one of the main reasons, obviously, is climate change here. This is a famous quote by Gus Smith, who was the founder of the NRDC, the very big environmentalist. So he said that I used to think that global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So this is a kind of a founding quote of our nonprofit, that we are trying to focus on how to become scientists that do this, that do focus on these deeper cultural elements, because the root problem of climate change stems from our worldview. It stems from an anthropocentric mindset that treats nature as an object rather than as kin, which I'll get more into here today. Of course, we need to define progress in a different way, design, rebuild society in a different way, and these are all things that we will be talking about. If not today, then the next time too here. So, recent study just came out in 2025 in the journal Ecopsychology and Earth. And so Mike Richardson found that people's connection to nature has declined by more than 60% since 1800, almost exactly mirroring the disappearance of nature words such as river moss and lots of books, according to the study. Most experts do believe nature connectedness as kind of the metric responsible for a lot of our climate issues today. And if we can, a lot of studies in the journal Ecopsychology have shown that if we can increase people's nature connectedness, then that allows them to understand how to live and be a more sustainable member on Earth. So this is more of a scientific approach to how to do that. And this is, again, something that we might even be trying here with Charlevoix. We might be working with Charlevoix Community Foundation on a few nature connectedness type projects here. So computer modeling predicts that the levels of nature connectedness will continue to decline unless there are far-reaching policy and societal changes. Again, getting at that deeper root cause of the climate change issue here. So. Okay, so probably the most common criticism I ever get from scientists and anybody about any parts of my work is that they feel like it's very idealistic. I think that this is a very common criticism for anybody who's ever tried to make social change ever in the history of the world. But I believe that actually how we're living today is the idealistic part, because we've been living a very specific way for 95 to 99% of our human evolutionary history, and that is actually our default culture of how we've evolved to live. And we're pushing so hard trying to live a different way, and that is actually the underlying causal reason for so many of our issues at a societal level. And this is a famous quote by David Graeber, one of my favorite anthropologists,
that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make, we could just as easily make differently.
Because we are the
Masters of our domain, we can make our social environments different than how they are today. And a good experiment to bring this to bear here is the 1970s
experiment in Rat Park. If you took Introduction to Psychology, you probably learned about
Rat Park.
So before 1970s, everything we knew about addiction was, hey, we think it's all genetically based. We think it's due to the individual just having this defect. They're more likely to be addicted. Yeah, it's more deterministic rather than relating to any sort of environmental thing. So before, when we were doing addiction research, we would give rats one water laced with morphine or cocaine and one just regular water. And of course, the rats would overdose and just continuously drink the cocaine and morphine laced water. One psychologist came along in the 1970s and said, hey, we are doing this. The context of this study really matters. We need to focus on the environment because we're performing these addiction studies in isolating environments. So he created something called Rat Park. He made the environment more socially stimulating. He brought more rats into it, made it more fun. And still gave them the morphine and cocaine laced water with the regular water. And over time, the rats actually eventually chose to prefer the regular water over the cocaine or morphine laced water. So what we can really draw from this is that addiction is not just about chemical dependency or genetics. It's a lot to do with the environments we're constructing around us, what we would call our psychosocial needs as a social species. Actually, we're one of the most social species in nature. And so it's a lot about disconnection, social disconnection, not just chemicals here. Oh, and this was quite revolutionary, by the way, because obviously before this, everything we thought about addiction was about chemical dependency and genetics. But over the last 40, 50 years, basically everything we've come to understand in psychology has proven this to be the main case. That we're not looking at so many of the environmental aspects around addiction or any other disease for that matter. So another famous rodent experiment. This one's my favorite, but it's also the most disturbing, called the Universe 25 experiment. So the first one, right in Utopia, looked at our psychosocial needs as a social species. The second one looks at more of our psycho-spiritual needs, I would call them, finding meaning and connection in our societies. So what John Calhoun did, he tried to make a mouse utopia to the best of his ability. He provided as many social necessities that a mouse could want. He provided unlimited food and water, unlimited play space, a bunch of fun mouse wheels, and of course they were in a socially lucrative environment with other mice here. So over time, what he found, he was actually just trying to study overcrowding at first, but after he continuously did this, his results kind of, or his interpretation of the research findings switched a bit. But what he found was for the first few generations, up into about like 500, 600 days after colonization. I can't remember how many mice there were. If it was like 600 to 1,000. Oh, yeah, 2,000 mice there. Once you hit that peak there, then the mice start falling off and you start seeing behavioral decline. And so the really weird thing about these mice, once you see this, is that you start seeing things like, they call them the beautiful ones. So these would be the rats or the mice that weren't interested in anything to do with being a rat. They just wanted to groom themselves. A lot of psychologists today and analogize that to the Instagram generation. People just wanting to be about themselves. And then they also led to aggression towards other mice. It led to infanticide, which is very rare in nature. It's the mother killing the baby. So it's a massive behavioral abnormality in nature that you really only see under really different behavioral or contextual conditions. And then, of course, social withdrawal. And so this society collapsed after 1,500 days. And the really scary thing about this is that John Calhoun performed this experiment 25 times in the exact same way, and every single time he had the exact same result. And so what we gather from this, society collapsed despite all this relative abundance
because what he was focusing on was only providing for the material needs of the mice, no
part of the other parts of the needs of mice, which is very minuscule relative to our needs as humans here. But
so there's a warning about social disconnection,
psychosocial disconnection, and psycho-spiritual disconnection as well, which we'll get to the key takeaways here. So a big part, environment shapes our behavior. The social environments we construct largely shape how we act in our societies. Addiction, violence, and withdrawal are responses to poor, unnatural environments. Really need a greater emphasis on environments. Spirituality is central to survival. Again, I will define spirituality later on. I hope I get to that slide. This is grounded in evolutionary mismatch theory that humans are social animals like rats and mice. And then whenever we deviate from our natural conditions that we really evolved, that all of our brains evolved to function within, that's when we see behavioral abnormalities, collapse, and dysfunction. So society is fragile. We need to remember that, but it's definitely not immutable. And we can create a better society that isn't just about material needs. It's also about social and spiritual needs. So the main idea is that we need to construct better environments and understand that the health of individuals is inseparable from the health of our environments. Okay, so yeah, we can. We're kind of starting to see a lot of these grim trends perfectly clear today of both Rat Park and Universe 25, in the decline of trust in our institutions, polarization, economic inequality, military overreach. So these are metrics that social scientists and political theorists use to map social decline and collapse. Usually having one marker marks the relative probability that a society is in decline or falling. Unfortunately, the United States is just on the cusp of hitting all five, and it is on track to hit all five by the end of this year, which there's this really weird thing in history. We don't know why this exists, that every single empire ends around 250 years. The Rome collapsed after 248. Ottoman Empire collapsed 251, and British, I think, like 253, or maybe 250, I can't remember. Of course, there's more nuance in when these empires started to, but yeah, this is just a weird historical anomaly that not many people have a good explanation for. And we believe we see a lot of these same things going on in the United States today, because we do also see a lot of the behavioral abnormalities arise from these trends. So sorry to be a downer, but I think it's important to know this too. So, so sorry for the explicative title here. I'm working with publishers right now. I was going to call it Save Your Thoughts and Prayers, but they advised me to be a bit more provocative, and they thought that I might sell my book a bit more. I might think about to Save Your Thoughts and Prayers, but so this will be a small book that I will probably publish myself. I might work with one publisher, but I'm not a massive fan of the publishing industry. But I'm working with some of the mass shooting nonprofits on this work, because essentially what we're saying, the underlying cause root of everything that we're trying to do in mass shootings at a society or socio-political level is a surface level solution. Again, the same with addiction. I don't believe we're getting to the root cause of mass shootings, which again stems from that social collapse, that behavioral collapse from unnatural social environments that we have. So again, it's the same prescription for climate change as it is for addiction, that we just need to restructure our socio-political systems and socio-economic systems to better fit how we evolve to live. So yeah, I won't go so deep into that. But in this book, I also, again, apologies for the spoiler, but I talk about shit societies versus care societies. So shit societies I classify as spiritually hollow, individualistic tribes. A lot of good research here. Tribe, by the way, this is the #1 book that I ever recommend to people. It's the shortest book. Sebastian Junger isn't a scientist, but he distills the science really, really well. He is, what is it? He's a journalist that goes, a war journalist. He was trying to understand why soldiers continue to go back to fight even when they didn't like fighting, when they didn't want to go back and do that job. It was mostly because they felt connected to that tribe, to their members, to their brothers who were fighting, and they felt like they had a duty. Again, this is
very well grounded in
modern anthropological evidence today. This is how humans, especially men, really evolved to live. And this is a massive thing that, especially in the United States, we do probably the worst relative to any other country I've ever lived in, because we are the most highly individualistic society out there. And I believe that leads to a lot of issues on its own. And that's also why I believe we have more mass shootings than like the next 7 or 8 countries combined. And I believe that I didn't mention that, by the way. Mass shootings are kind of the perfect litmus test of how well constructed your social constraints are, because they're kind of like infanticide. They're kind of one of the biggest arrangements that a human can go through, that they just feel they're so disconnected from their social environment that they want to kill other members within that social environment. So I believe, unfortunately, we kind of live in that type of society in the United States. And yeah, I believe if we evolve closer towards a care society, with stronger cohesion, secure attachment, high belonging, reciprocity as a norm, then yes, we can get at the root cause of a whole lot of our issues here. So I think the question we should be asking ourselves once we do take note of these findings, that what if these are not symptoms of a society losing its values, but what if these are the consequences of a society fully living them out? So what if this precarious moment in our tenured history does not signal a regression of American philosophy or Western philosophy, but it's an inevitable endpoint? What if from the very beginning, the American experiment was built upon a set of flawed philosophical foundations whose consequences are only now coming fully into view here? And so a lot of foundations, philosophical foundations of American and Western philosophy, apparently, are individualism and freedom, capitalism and laissez-faire, economics, democracy, and republicanism, pragmatism, cultural myths, and narratives. And you do see a lot of good stuff here. I'm not going to disparage everything in the United States, because actually there are a lot of great things that I love coming back and looking forward to. And of course, I came back and moved my family here for some specific reasons. So I'm not ultimately disparaging everything in the United States, but there are some very specific reasons why we do see some of our issues arising more strongly in the United States than anywhere else. And so this kind of is a good example of somewhat of the false philosophical assumptions around some parts of our society here. So John Maynard Keynes, he's known as the British founder of modern economic theory, one of the founders. He wrote a very unsavory essay in 1928 called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he predicted what life would be like in 100 years. So basically by 2030, he believed that people would work a minimum of 15 hours a week, that they are free to pursue art, philosophy, and leisure. Also predicted that the standard of life would be about 4 times higher, not just in developed countries, but all around the world. And of course, the reality of his prediction is that none of this came true, and we're devolving back the other way. And so he overlooked the immutable historical trend that as a society grows in their modernization, they tend to place more of an emphasis on working longer hours and harder hours than shorter hours. And David Graeber has an explanation for this. He calls it managerial feudalism. He believes that about 40 to 60% of the workforce today is a bullshit job, that it's not something that's actually socially useful. It's something that's just there to present a good facade for the corporate CEOs and bankers to say, hey, I'm bigger than everybody else. And that's a very basic understanding of that book. So if you want to read more, then I highly recommend his book there. But the lesson is just simple here, that when we focus on just material progress, because that's only what John Maynard Keynes was focusing on, that's what a lot of our economic theories primarily focus on. When we just focus on material progress, like the Universe 25 experiments, it doesn't match up with our actual reality, and we see a lot of the behavioral abnormalities that we get in our society today. So, and then, so this is kind of the new wave that I would call of modern economics. There's a new thing called Evonomics, evolutionary economics, which is grounding it more in ecological theory and evolutionary theory. 2 really good books. Steve Keen, Debunking Economics. He's an economist, and Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. That's kind of a more future version of how we should grow our economic systems. And of course, my mentor, David Sloan Wilson, he's interdisciplinary thinker. That's why I loved him, and I love him. And so he recently wrote this and published it in Economics. He's publishing a big thing with that journal called Rethinking the Theoretical Foundations of Economics, the Multi-Level Paradigm. So it's basically bringing economics under a firm scientific basis, giving it that evolutionary background. So then you can work on a multi-level scale rather than just focusing on things on an individual level, which is a lot of our individual laissez-faire type economics has always focused on that. So so one of the myths of modern economic theory that environment is outside the economy. Of course, the economy depends fully on the biosphere, energy, and irreplaceable ecosystems. Markets and growth, that markets are self-correcting. Growth is always good. Tech will save us. We know after 200 years of this experiment, finding out that this doesn't usually happen. Markets privatize costs. Infinite growth on a finite planet is collapse. And tech can't usually override ecological limits, and that's exactly what we're seeing with the data centers here, because they're massively increasing our energy needs right now. And one thing too, so the invisible hand was constructed in Victorian ethos landscape of Europe. Of course, there was a big study that came out. I think it wasn't MIT. I can't remember who it was that published it. It's in this. I can find it in my political pamphlet here. But they showed that how the notion of the invisible hand has turned out to be a massive fallacy. That usually all of the capital and funds just continue funneling to the top, and it very rarely distributes down to the bottom people. And that's why we're seeing a lot of our issues in our society today. And of course, GDP, I can't even talk enough about this. So Simon Kuznets is the economist who came up with the concept of GDP. He went to Congress in 1937 and warned Congress not to use this as a measure of economic welfare because it's too general. It doesn't give you good insights into how those economic transactions are performed and who's benefiting from them. That was his hesitation, his warning. But of course, what is our major economic metric that we use for economic progress, and we compare with all other societies around the world today, is GDP. Main reason is because a lot of our modern economic system can hide behind GDP because it doesn't give you those more specifics on, again, who's benefiting the most from increasing GDP and telling you who's not benefiting from increasing GDP. Okay, so debt slavery too, something that we should probably touch on a little bit. John Perkins, fantastic man. I met him. He used to be a CIA operative. His job was called an economic hitman. And so his job was to go to developed countries, third world countries, and basically force them to take on these massive loans from corporations or from the United States government, basically forcing them later on, loans that he knew that they would never be able to pay back, and then that they could extract more resources and profit from those countries later on. So he kind of gave insight into the criminal underbelly of what's been going on with the CIA there, which of course we're coming to understand a little bit more with the Epstein files, but I don't want to talk so much about that today too. But I promise you, it sounds really conspiracy theory type thinking. If you read the Economic Hitman, you will see it's definitely not that. And John Perkins, his recent edition, he talks more about how China is now they have the same equivalent of an economic hitman, but their version is much worse. They've understood how to do economic hitmen better than anybody else. Also fascinating because he was doing this in Panama, I believe, when he started working with the indigenous community, and he really grew a respect for their knowledge. So he wrote this book. He basically said, I'm stopped working for the CIA. Of course, they tried to kill him once. But he got away, and he lives in Quito, Ecuador right now. He founded the Pachamama Alliance, which is trying to do a lot of the same things that we do with the New People Foundation. We work very closely with them. So he talks about what he was doing in an international sense is also something that a lot of our corporate structure attempts to do here within nations, which is again enslaving us through debt, also called usury. I just learned today, and actually for about 2,000 years, this was illegal in most countries because everybody realized that if you have loans, if you have somebody giving out loans, then you will end up enslaving them in the long term. So just something to stay aware of that freedom does become conditional under the certain socioeconomic context here. And so this is a pamphlet that we're working on with a few cool people. We've been in the fight of data centers for a very long time. And I love the data center topic because I just learned that 85% of Republicans don't want data centers, 90% of Democrats don't want data centers. So we're asking ourselves, if that's the case, why do we have data centers? And it's because a lot of the dark money that the utility corporations and big tech specifically have been giving to basically all of our politicians in Lansing. And Governor Whitmer, they just said that there was a big story in the Detroit Free News Press last month showing how she got $5 million of dark money. It was hidden money for a long time from DTE, the utility company who's trying to bring in a massive big tech data center in Saline Township, which the Saline Township voted against. They didn't want it. Nobody wants it. Big tech came in. I believe this one was Oracle. They sued the township because of the tax exemptions that Governor Whitmer set up, or she revived them, that they were going to actually fall 2 years ago. And so, yeah, Oracle sued the community, and now they're forced with a big data center, even though nobody wants this in their community. So I don't feel this is correct. I feel a lot of people in Michigan need to know more of these types of stories. So that's why we came up with Common Enemy to talk about how our main identity boundaries today is not left and right. It's the 99% versus the 1%. Because again, most of us define progress. This is perfectly showing how Democrats and Republicans really don't want the same future, or we do want the same future. We don't want an increasingly digital future. We want a future that is, more about social relationships and building better communities. So I think every time I talk with anybody from any part of the political spectrum, we do mostly agree once we get together and talk about these things. Okay, so how am I doing on time here?
I'm right there.
Oh, there's a lot. Oh, okay. Okay, we can get there this part probably. So maybe if we want to do just a brief round of questions before I get into the next part. No questions, comments. Glad nobody came up here and touched me yet.
I just want to say right away, I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, it's what I've been thinking pretty much my entire life. And so you really also there's ways you can maybe do something involved and do something.
Yeah, thank you. I think most people think this way too. That's what we're finding too when we actually have these conversations. That was the weirdest thing about living in other countries, because everybody can talk about politics and religion and it wouldn't be an identity war, because they didn't associate their identities. They didn't have the tribal boundaries between the left and the right. They viewed everybody as within their social tribe there. So that's one thing that I think we need to get back to in the United States more. And there's a really cool group I just learned called Purple Assembly that's going to be doing that in Northern Michigan. So I think we're going to be helping them with some community chats here. So yeah, please.
Well, I just kind of wanted to ask you how you thought AI would be impacting what seems like this cycle of mistrust where people are fed information, well, and like the algorithms that we have today that kind of just, it's like a positive feedback loop, and it's only getting worse with this new AI. So I'm just wondering how you think that's going to affect our future and our environmental role.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely lead, as that one study predicted, that it'll lead to more nature connectedness decline, as every technology, major technology has. Of course, every technology we've ever had over the last 2,000 to 4,000 years, it can be wielded as a massive tool advantage for that society that can benefit everybody, top down, bottom up, but it can also be wielded as a massive weapon. And so I think if it gets in the hands of the wrong people, I believe we're a little bit becoming exposed to that over the last few days with what we're seeing with the Epstein files and how connected a lot of this stuff is. I think that it really worries me who are the people that are leading these big tech corporations and hear how they talk about the world too. And that worries me the most, probably, actually. So I think that we need to put up more guardrails. We need new legislation on big tech and on AI. And I think that we don't have that right now. And the big issue is because money in politics, and they're giving a lot of money to politicians. Another issue is a lot of our legislation doesn't understand AI or tech. Because I've had a lot of conversations with members in Lansing, and yeah, it's quite clear that they can't wrap their heads around what the heck a data center even is, let alone what AI will do to previous generations. So It's something that I think we really right now need to just put a stop break on and say, hey, we need to think about this a lot more and where this is going to take us as a society. Because I think we're all worried. I think the left and the right are very worried about it. Everybody in our society is worried about it. That's not big tech. That's not in this massive arms race against other CEOs to try to be the best at something. So yeah, we will talk. So after hearing all this information, I think it behooves oneself to ask, how did this all start? How do we get on this path? And so this is something called the age of separation that Charles Eisenstein calls here. So a brief overview of the anthropological literature here. So agriculture. So again, for 95 to 99% of our human evolutionary history, we existed in hunter-gathering, more nomadic communities. We didn't really settle and farm. Although there are some exceptions to that rule and some very cool exceptions to that rule in a new book called The Dawn of Everything that just got published a few years ago. It's kind of the new way that we look at anthropological history. But by and large, this still works. So agriculture founded about after the last ice age, from 12,000 years ago to about 5,000 years ago, humans started settling down and farming more. Again, we think that's because they just lost faith that they could hunt and gather like they could before. Caused massive issues in diet, by the way, because then it was more about monocultural farming, and a lot of people had very restrictive diets relative to our hunter-gathering ancestry, which then had cognitive impacts too. But agriculture led to surplus for the first time in our history. Once you get surplus, then you do get this emphasis on materialism. Once you have materialism and you have surplus, you have kind of this loss of this group self. You see these communal type tribalistic structures erode, and you see individual families just farming for them and their families, rather than living in a community and everybody providing and helping everybody out. And so once you have surplus and you have this loss of group self, this loss of tribal identity, you do see the rise of hierarchical structures more. Because before, again, we mostly our main socio-political ideology was egalitarianism for most of our evolutionary history. But again, once we had surplus and we had something that people could learn to steal and to hoard, and so that led to cities, because once you have something to hoard, somebody else really wants to come and steal it from you. Whenever you place a physical barrier between humans and nature, you also get that spiritual barrier, because then humans will be spending most of their time in a city in an anthropocentric environment rather than being around nature all the time. So you do see the rise of cities leading to spiritual disconnection on another scale here. So you also see with these structures, because there is a very specific way our societies evolved into kind of the hierarchical structures that we have today. You see the emergence of writing, bureaucracy, centralized politics, rule of law, monotheistic religion, history. These are social developments that do evolve once humans sit down and exist in a very city-type landscape for a long time. And that major reason is that these are adaptations. So, what I saw, yeah. So to sustain the explosion of people now living in cities, cultures had to evolve new socio-political tools or ways to bind large groups together without the old tribal bonds. So this kicked off a massive zero-sum game that cultures that could invent the best methods for enhancing group cohesion became the ones most likely to survive, expand, and dominate others over time. So of course, I'm simplifying everything here to the evolution of modernity, but it's a useful map because it's a rough sketch of the causal forces that shaped the modern world here. And so one second. Back on track. Okay, yeah, so one of the most powerful new sociopolitical adaptations was the invention of a new worldview known as anthropocentrism, that human beings are the most important entity in the universe of Earth, which conflates with kincentrism, which is the main way that all of our ancestors believe for 95 to 99% of human evolutionary history. But ironically, we'll be talking about kincentrism maybe later, we get into it. This comes from the historian Leonard White Jr.'s work, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, talking about how Christian dominion theology talking about how human in the Judeo-Christian Bible states that humans were created in the image of God and are instructed to subdue earth and to have dominion over all other living creatures. And so, yeah, religious apologists use this to condone an instrumental view of nature where they feel completely okay with, I guess, disrupting or destroying nature to bending it to their own will here. So, again, if this feels like it conflicts with your worldview, I want to get into the nuance of this because I don't believe that this is actually part of Christianity. This is something that was tagged on later on, and for other ulterior motives than what early Christianity really was. But again, this also was seen in Greek culture. There's a percentage tendency here that man is the measure of all things. I believe that's Plato who said that. I can't remember who said that. But they created a great chain of beings where man sat above everything else on earth, all the way down, animals, plants, and then rocks are the lowliest formed thing here. So, and so anthropocentrism wasn't just a story; it did become a powerful philosophical idea for justifying a lot of the socio-political adaptations that we're talking about: domination, hierarchy, and control over the natural world. And so one way how this evolved is that Abrahamic philosophy changed time and nature. So before Abrahamic philosophy, time was generally understood as being cyclical. You had seasons, renewal, and eternal return. Humans as kin within nature, bound by reciprocity and respect, meaning found in ongoing relationship with land and life. Funny enough, too, indigenous linguistic structures tend to place more of an emphasis on verbs rather than nouns. They don't have any discrete, really, things in their worldview, in their which is emblematic of their linguistic structures, or probably the other way around. Whereas in our Western society, we tend to place more emphasis on nouns, on discrete categorizations of things. So that's just an interesting tidbit here. But yeah, after the Abrahamic worldview, time became redefined as linear. There became a beginning and end in a one-way march towards progress. Nature became reframed as fallen, corrupt, and subordinate to human dominion. And human destiny was cast as separate from earth, awaiting salvation beyond it. So this shifted culture from being in nature to mastery over nature, justified exploitation of land and animals as spiritually sanctioned, broke the relational bond that guided human survival for millennia. And by redefining time as linear and nature as fallen, Abrahamic philosophy severed humanity from its ecological belonging. Okay, so this is the salvationist ideology and original sin notions of the Abrahamic religions. I believe that they were more employed as tools of state control rather than actually being facets of Christianity themselves. Salvationist ideology is that redemption lies outside this world in heaven through divine intermediaries. The original sin doctrine, humanity is inherently flawed, guilty from birth, in need of external salvation. This is why you really do need a corporate structure to back that up. And this is how it has served power over time, because it creates those hierarchy systems and creates dependence on priesthoods and rulers as gatekeepers to salvation, instills shame and guilt that suppress individuality and dissent, justifies hierarchical state-run societies. And why it's wrong is that it contradicts human nature as an inherently creative, relational, and whole, as well as our beings as genetically predisposed people to be morally beings. And we'll talk about that hopefully in the second here. But it also alienates us from the earth by framing the material world as corrupt. Again, this is so in the early,
Right after Jesus, for about 300 years, 400 years.
The early Christian church was extremely more pluralistic in the way that it thought about things than it is today. There are many different, what's called syncretism. There's many different comings together of Jesus' teachings with Celtic philosophy, with Hellenic Greek philosophy or religious ideology. One of these is the Gnostics. And so this is the Nag Hammadi scriptures, by the way, they just uncovered in 1937. This is what we think was the actual original Bible. So religious scholars vary. They believe that there were between 10 and 36 gospels, texts actually talking about Jesus' teachings. Of course, the modern Bible today only has 4. So what all the other texts really talking about is quite important to religious scholars today. Funny enough, if you go into a seminary, every future priest talks about this, but then they don't really want to talk about this in front of the pulpit. So Yeah, I love having conversations with priests about this because they know about this. But yeah, it's something that is not so well known outside of this. And so the Gnostics were a version of Christianity, but they did see two aspects of the more Abrahamic, what they called the Zakididim tradition of Abrahamic religion, which eventually morphed into the kind of Christianity that we have more today. They saw two facets of it: the salvationist ideology and the Redeemer complex as being psychologically toxic because it instills guilt, self-loathing, and dependency on external saviors and alienates humanity from innate wholeness in the living earth. And so it was viewed as spiritual hijacking of the human imagination and freedom. Again, this goes into why centuries later, the Cathars, any Gnostic tradition was effectively stamped out by the church because they were actually probably the most historically oppressed people in European history, because anytime any amount of Gnostic anything came back up, the church did its best to stomp it out right away. And also why, again, I feel like this doesn't conflate with modern Christianity. If you are a Christian here, is I think that what happened with the modern Bible became in its modern form today during the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. Emperor Constantine basically chose which parts of the Bible he wanted to keep in and discarded the other parts of the Bible. If you look into Emperor Constantine, you can quite easily tell that he didn't have religion on his mind at all. He didn't give two rats but about religion. He just cared about what a lot of the Roman empires cared about before him, expanding the Roman Empire. And he realized that a specific sect of Christianity, a specific way of framing Christianity could really accomplish his goals with this. So, there were 7 other Council of Nicaea after that. Every single one diluted the Bible a little bit more. And so, you can go back and research a bit more of the biblical history. But I really implore you to read the Nag Hammadi, because it does give the other Gospels talking about what Jesus preached. And it's a little bit different, obviously, than I think, a little bit different than what the Christian religion teaches today. But I don't think it's so different that it's fundamentally causing like a massive issue, but at least not for me, and I don't believe for a lot of the people that I talk about this with. But the two basic differences between Gnostic Christianity and Constantinian Christianity, as I frame it, is that Constantinian or Gnostic Christianity was more about finding your own spiritual path. It wasn't about needing any orthodoxy or any state-run or let's say any sort of authoritarian order to give you salvation. It's more about finding the salvation within yourself. Probably won't go into so much here, but fun fact about Gnostic Christianity too is that it was basically an earlier offshoot, because you have to understand religions evolve just like people do, linguistic structures just like people do too. A lot of people don't know this. Is probably the coolest, I would say, scientific discovery of the last century, is that no matter where you go in the world, every pre-modern culture kind of believed in the same thing. And they had a very indigenous worldview, a very indigenous way of looking at the world that was grounded in a nature-based spirituality. So the Celts were the first intercontinental European culture between 800 BC and 250 BC. Again, before the Roman Republic, it spanned from the Irish Isles down to Hispaniola, all the way over to modern-day Ukraine, and all the way down to Turkey there. So, the Celts were the massive culture, but they embodied just about every single aspect that we would call an indigenous culture today. They were primarily a matrilineal and matriarchal society, gender-balanced societies. Nature-based spirituality was their primary spiritual systems. A lot of this knowledge in this time morphed into Gnosticism at this time. So this is, again, what I call this, or what's known as syncretism, is when you have morphing different religious or any type of ideas. And so Celtic, a lot of the Celtic pagan roots transformed into Christianity. So actually, a lot of the teachings from the Bible too came from earlier Celtic traditions. So this is why a lot of the things that you read in the Bible too are earlier offshoots from knowledge from earlier ancestral cultures here. Okay, so after the Council of Nicaea and what Emperor Constantine did, it caused something called an epistemic restriction or epistemic bottleneck. So it really suppressed a lot of Europe's indigenous wisdom, and the rise of dogmatic salvationism closed off an imagination, stifled knowledge, and plunged Europe into centuries of darkness. Most historians do agree on this, so there's lots of nuances on this subject, of course. But of course, I don't think I can get into all of it here today. So what happened, the scholastics were essentially the first scientists. That was like Thomas Aquinas. They were clergymen that just really wanted to know nature, and because they believed nature was God, was the same framing as God. And so they had this early Christian theology based on Aristotelian logic as well, that God is omniscient and omnipotent, that all events are foreordained. This framed reality as fixed, knowledgeable order created by divine law. So this is something called theological determinism. Then we see theological determinism shifting into, scientific determinism. Because people like Descartes and Newton and Hobbes were all very religious men, but also the earliest scientists too. So they didn't have any of this boundary between science and religion during this time. And so theological determinism kind of morphed into scientific determinism. It's kind of the exact same idea, that there are basically one law, and once we know that law, then we can effectively predict the effect. Or no, once we know the cause, one cause here, then we can effectively predict the effect, and these are known as laws, universal laws of the world. And yeah, most scientists have actually been operating in more of a deterministic aspect for about the last 500 years, and then we'll get into why we're slightly changing today. But again, just note here that theological determinism evolved ever so slightly into scientific determinism, which became just the same thing, but just in a different hat here. And it did also pave the way. This is because again, whenever we're talking about intellectual things, we're also talking about how this relates to the socio-political context, how it relates to the socio-ecological context. So all these things are interrelated, and these type of ideas emboldened other type of ideas like European colonization and just alienation from natural systems. So then, okay, so we're about 6, so we're getting close here. So then we see the mechanistic worldview has been our primary paradigm of science for the last 500 years. Again, scientific determinism gave that philosophical context for the mechanistic worldview to emerge. The main reason is that Descartes and Newton surmised that all of nature, humans, including that, are like machines, that we can reduce them to just very specific parts and understand them that way. That birthed the philosophy of reductionism, so that the majority of science has been practiced over the last 500 years by looking at any natural phenomena from its smallest level possible. So yeah, it's more about the sum of parts rather than the whole. And this again emboldened instrumental philosophy, social hierarchies, control, European colonization, etc. And so we see this kind of mechanistic framework too. This is the father of modern cultural anthropology, E.V. Taylor. He was what we call an armchair anthropologist because he didn't really go study with hunter-gathering communities and just observe them from far. But he was following in the European tradition of this progress notion, non-linear progress notion that, we have the primitives here, they're the savages. As Thomas Hobbes says, that the lives of them were nasty, short, and brutish. And we want nothing of that sort. Because again, the Europeans had to view themselves as being superior in knowledge and spirituality and everything else to everybody else. So they constructed a system that they're better than everybody else. So in line with that, E.V. Taylor constructed the first way that we thought about religion as going from this, it's a linear progressive structure from going from animism, which is a nature-based spirituality that he used the word animism here, to polytheism, then to monotheism being the ultimate
highest regard. Funny enough, he was actually an atheist in 1870, and he was trying to Darwinize religious studies. And so he didn't believe monotheism was the ultimate end. He told in letters to all of his friends that he believed science and atheism was the ultimate aim of humanity, but he frequently did not tell a lot of people that. So, yeah, that's his framing of that. Again, race was built in this history. It's a social construct. It was built to justify the colonial expansion because, of course, the European settlers were forced in the morally precarious position of doing horrible things to these people that they were colonizing, so they had to justify why they were doing it. So they basically invented this new thing called race. Of course, in biological terms today, we know that there is no real such thing as race. At 99.9% of DNA, it's most of our differences are epigenetic differences. They're also environmentally constructed. In most genetic variation, this is a classical population genetics assumption today, stems from within populations and not between races, which is a fascinating study that I can't go into more here, but basically the core of that is that race is a social concept with very real consequences of how we live today. It's always been used as a classic divide and conquer tool. Great Britain used it in India to embolden the class system, so then they can basically extract all their resources. They also did the same in Uganda, in Zimbabwe. So yeah, it's always been used as a tool to divide and conquer. Taylor, again, another cultural anthropologist, he was worse than Fraser. Not going to go into so much more of what he thought. But again, why are they calling this animism? Because from their perspective, all pre-modern people believed that there were spirits that resided in plants, animals, or inanimate objects. So it includes this idea that natural objects have souls that may exist apart from their material bodies. And actually, the soul idea was an idea from the Celtic indigenous religion that then morphed into Christianity. So that's where that comes from. But then, because Abrahamic philosophy saw time as linear rather than cyclical, they began to frame how they believed the journey of souls went from being, more about you're born here, you spend your life, and then you go to heaven after this. So it's more of a linear understanding rather than a reincarnation interpretation of what happens with souls. But I won't be able to get into actually some of the really cool science that's happened in the last 20 to 30 years that is somewhat giving us a suggestion that there might be some scientific validity to this idea of souls going through this kind of reincarnation cycle. So you'll have to come to my next talk to hear that, because I believe we're getting close to the end.
I had to be away for a few minutes, but has there been an opportunity for questions?
We did one at the first part, and I'm getting close to the end of the second part, so then we can get a few here. So, yeah. Darwin, again, birth in the Victorian ethos, but there were some very real spiritual implications to his theory of natural selection, because he basically threw everything that we knew about the anthropocentric world in space. Because he recognized descent with modification, that he recognized that humans are not separate from nature, that we share a common ancestry with nature, very endemic to the indigenous way of thinking, that humans are no longer distinct from nature. And of course, his theory of natural selection is that nature is our God, that we don't have some sort of anthropomorphic God, but nature is the surrounding environment that kind of selects for beneficial characteristics and purifies bad ones. So that is why nature is kind of our grand clockwork. But then, of course, a lot of Christian scientists who were also evolutionary biologists interpreted that you had artificial selection, God working through natural selection. So there are many different ways to think about this too. So again, I won't go so much into this, but there are two. This is a book I'm working on with Cambridge University Press, and so I'm kind of comparing and contrasting and drawing a boundary between what I see two different scientific paradigms. So first is the Newtonian science, which is about determinism, mechanism, reductionism, the kind of old way that we used to look at science. The Darwinian science is the way that all sciences have been evolving, especially after the quantum revolution, because we know we can't just have very simplified causal frameworks anymore. We do have to understand all of the messy causation of any single natural phenomenon that we're talking about, because if we just look at things in a very purely mathematical way, in a very linear way, we won't be able to frame all of the different causal aspects of that. So we see every single science from anthropology to physics to biology moving more towards a Darwinian systems type understanding of the world, where you take in a greater complex understanding of causation that incorporates reciprocal influences, feedback loops. You have different goals of explanations. You're not just trying to explain things at its lowest level in the shortest amount of time. You're taking longer frameworks and trying to explain how this stuff evolves over time. And so this is what I wrote my theory on, multi-level selection theory, which, we will get to it just a bit here. So yeah, the development of systems theory kind of led to a lot of these changes. We had this shift from linear to nonlinear causation in a lot of the sciences. And it does portend a new scientific worldview. So it moves beyond these mechanical models to embrace relationality, emergence, and multi-causality, things that we didn't really embrace in the traditional Newtonian tradition. Traditional Newtonian paradigm. That
does align, I would say, better with indigenous and ecological epistemologies and worldviews. So again, this is why I believe that we're sort of having these resurgences, coming back moments in the sciences. Great book by Friedrich Kaplan, and about the systems view of life and how this is having a new way that we're thinking about life and more about feedback loops. And one of my favorite authors, Paul Shepard, anthropologist and psychologist. We live with the possibility of a primal closure all around us aspect of the modern world: diet, exercise, medicine, art, work, family, philosophy, economics, ecology, psychology have begun a long circle back toward their former coherence. Whether they can arrive before the natural world is damaged beyond repair and madness destroys humanity, we cannot tell. And so just another brilliant quote that I love, Charles Eisenstein here. Our society is based upon competition and anxiety, in part because these are implicit in our basic understanding of the universe. To forge a new psychology and collectively a new society that is not underpinned by anxiety will therefore require a new conception of self and life, and therefore of science and universe. So thus the foundations for building a new society must begin with biology, specifically through the lens of what we call multi-level selection theory today. And so we need a new conception of self and life, just as Charles Eisenstein talks about here. That doesn't just talk about how individuals act and compete against one another, but how we understand cooperation through the greater web of species and coevolution of species. And so this is today's biology, the new frameworks of how we look at biology, multi-level selection theory, and the Gaia. Most people probably haven't heard of one or the other. We do have an Oxford University Press volume coming out here late summer. David's the editor, but I contributed a piece to that. So yeah, if you want to know more, I'll give you more research on multi-level selection theory, but basic understanding of it. Again, Darwin was born in this Victorian ethos. So his focus was primarily on how individuals competed within populations and that procured biological adaptations over time. So it was very heavily interested on focus on self-interest and individual advantage. But he did notice MLS type thinking in one of his books, Descent of Man. So he wrote, "It must not be forgotten that although a high standard of morality gives but a slight or no advantage to each individual man and his children over the other men of the same tribe, yet that an increase in the number of well-endowed men and an advancement in the standard of morality will certainly give an immense advantage to one tribe over another. A tribe including many members who, from possessing in a high degree the spirit of patriotism, fidelity, obedience, courage, and sympathy, were always ready to aid one another and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over most other tribes." And this would be natural selection. So we're talking about natural selection between separate groups, why we see sociopolitical adaptations evolve over time. And so the basic logic of MLS stands for the three conditions for Darwinian natural selection that we need are variation, inheritance, and fitness differences. We can apply the exact same thing to human societies, that groups vary. Of course, groups still have genes, so we still have sociopolitical adaptations at a group level. And then some groups survive over others because of these differences in those sociopolitical adaptations. So just a really quick example of multi-level selection. There was one guy, experimenter, who was testing individual selection versus multi-level selection. So he was selecting for the individual chickens that
that laid the most eggs. Yeah, thank you. That laid the most eggs because you're trying to see how over time you could get the most amount of a farmer could get the most amount of eggs possible. So he tested one group of individual chickens laying eggs and one of groups and how they vary in laying eggs. So the individual group he selected for the chickens that laid the most eggs over time, whereas in the group idea here, he selected for the groups that laid the most eggs over time. And what he found was that over a long time here, the groups that laid the most eggs over time actually outcompeted the individuals that laid the most eggs over time. And the reason is because the individuals who were laying the most eggs over time were actually pecking the other chickens, and they were competing against the other chickens. And that was actually driving the other chickens to not lay eggs, to be more distressed and not lay eggs. Whereas when he was selecting for the groups that were laying more eggs, had higher overall egg production, they tend to be more cooperative and working together as a team. That's why they led to greater egg production over time. So this is basically group selection encourages cooperation and benefits collective success over time. And again, I can't go through the entire timeline of multi-level section theory as an idea. You can note that it started with Darwin's problem of goodness. Modern synthesis is basically when modern biology was born. 1930s, the coming together of Darwinian natural selection with modern Mendelian genetics. We had a group selection controversy, can't talk about that, but yeah, today multi-level selection is becoming the new paradigm of biology here today. I promise this is my last slide too. I don't know if you want to say, Rob, but I think that we live in a very cool time right now because we are in what I would call the great consilience of indigenous and scientific philosophy. We're seeing two worldviews really come together, from conquest to connection. And so I'll just quote by Albert Einstein, look deeper into nature and then you will understand everything better. So that's the end of that part. I can't, obviously, I won't make it to the more fun part, which is the more fun part will be next time. But hopefully I'll have to come back another time and give the second round of this. But yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
I just missed the last one. The two sections coming together.
Yeah, so I believe today we see, like, with the systems worldview, which is basically how all of our pre-modern ancestors thought about the world for a long time. We're having a revolution of that back in the sciences. So I believe that we're having a coming together of the scientific mechanistic worldview with the systems worldview, because again, there are a lot of great things that we've uncovered with the mechanistic worldview. And so I'm also glad that we had that worldview for so long. But I think to really understand science and really understand natural phenomena, anything from spirituality to socio-political trends or anything we're trying to understand, you have to incorporate the lowest level of that, the mechanism, but you also have to incorporate the emergentism that evolves in the systems level and how these interact in between those levels too.
So a political question for you then. So how does that happen? Does it happen with one big giant global political control, or does that happen individual grassroots?
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about in the next section, and that's why I think it's more fun. Non-hierarchical societies, but basically talking about societal structures and how we evolved to live for that 95 to 99% of our human evolutionary history. And so again, this is, if our idea is to build a culture that doesn't have mass shootings, that doesn't have addictions, that doesn't have loneliness epidemic, that doesn't have climate change, and we want to solve climate change. If we want to build that society, I think it's fundamentally feasible. I think that we have to understand how our psychologies evolved in those natural socio-political and socioeconomic conditions that allowed for our psychologies to evolve that way. And so I think that the first thing is that we have to place a re-emphasis on community. And so this is the Eleanor Ostrom's idea of polycentricism, that community is the most important social unit, and it always has been in our evolutionary history. We are communal structures, and once we evolved these higher level social organizational nation states, we lost so much of what it means to be human, because then we lost something called the communal sieve, which selected for pro-social good behaviors and then didn't select didn't purify all the bad behaviors out too. So if somebody did something bad in our modern nation state today, they can just up and move to another city and not have the repercussions. Whereas if you live in a communal type rural environment, they still embody a lot of those natural conditions because you have the everybody knows everybody type atmosphere. So this is something that I also noticed traveling places like India, Poland. Like, there are places that retain this ancestral way of being better than we do, And that's why they don't have mass shootings. That's why they don't have depression, anxiety disorders. That's why they don't have addiction like we do. So, yeah, if our end goal is actually creating that type of society, then I think we have to reclaim that evolutionary wisdom and that way that our psychology is evolved to function. And that's what a lot of neuroscientific studies are telling us today too. So again, focus on community-based politics rather than anything higher. Anything higher, because you do need higher levels for groups to work together well, but it's not the primary unit. Unfortunately, our primary unit right now is a nation state, and I don't think that helps anyone here. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Sorry, probably strange. A lot of these ideas. I've been traveling for a long time too, and getting these from.
Actually, none of those ideas in parts 1 and 2 are new to me. It's
I
the
love it then.
part 3 that we missed that would have been better.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to do it next time because I have more fun doing part 3 because it's more of my work too, actually, other than multi-level selection theory. But is it not going back? Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. So. Yeah.
I feel like this has been a whole semester of college work, compressed in an hour and a half.
See, that's what I tried to do because usually I teach on like just one aspect of this or one, but I don't think you can draw as many connections between them because they are all interrelated. A lot of these things that I'm talking about, so it makes more sense when you present that. So I've been thinking about how to do this lecture for the last 10 years, by the way, because I've had a lot of stumbles in teaching it, and too abstract. So I'm trying to learn how to distill it the best way. So any feedback that you have on how it went and what you thought could be better or what worked too, super helpful. So
This might be really naive and out there, but I have never been able to really get my head around what the people in power and through these evolutionary happenings, what's their plan for an end game? What are they thinking? Or are they, how does somebody develop that just can't see the impact of?
what they do. Well, I think I can't obviously state that I'm not inside their heads. Actually, there are a few books that go inside of people of power. Says that's funny enough too. A lot of modern psychological research suggests that when people do become in places of power, their psychologies change. They activate different parts of their brains. So actually, this is one thing that I wish every politician no politician knows this, because if you're aware of this, if you're cognitively metacognitive of this, you tend to think, okay, maybe I'm letting this power get to me, and I should be more empathetic, because that's one of the orbital frontal cortex right here shuts off when people get in places of power, and they have less empathy actually. So one thing is that they have less, once they get that certain amount of power, they have less empathy for people that they view as not being them. They're still tribalistic thinking. But from history, I would have to say every single emperor, everybody who's got sedated by the power of power, basically, absolute power corrupts absolutely, has wanted more because it's a drug. And so I believe that everything that we're seeing, and I think I just read an email about this in the Epstein files, that the ultimate aim of a lot of the corporate infrastructure and the bankers behind the corporate infrastructure is to have one world government, because that means that they get to rule everything and everyone on the planet, and they get to build the world that they basically want. So again, that's why I think that it's very important for us 99% to realize that we're not in a war against all of us, especially us who don't have the power versus the people who are hoarding that power. And a lot of great evolutionary studies studying that dynamic that usually societies build over time. If there's any amount of power, people who gather the power, they tend to have a different, they make a different moral rule set for everybody else. And so they don't follow it, but they make everybody else follow it. It's basically, so then they can do anything they want to anybody, they justify anything, whereas everybody else has a different set of rules and punishment for if they deviate from those rules. So I believe that we see that simulation playing out quite a bit today. So,
Is there a gender specificity to power, leadership power, that goes along with that, or is it either whether it's male or female?
Either, but in this society, it depends on how the male and female was constructed in the culture that they were constructed into. I think that what we see in matriarchal societies, which is mostly how we've always evolved to live, is that their egalitarianism is the main way because, and actually every species that we see that is more matriarchal too, we do see egalitarianism being the main cooperative socio-political structure that they have. So I can't speak to why that is because I don't think I'm so well read in that area, but I just know that that's the pattern. That when you have these matriarchal societies, you do get more egalitarian type structures.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, yeah.
Appreciate it.